In the last year or so, we're finally beginning to see a robust market for electric vehicles. More manufacturers are now in the game, which provides buyers with more choices. The latest EVs have better batteries that deliver significantly more miles between charges. But the price is still a sticking point for some. The average EV sold for about $65,000 in May, according to Edmunds, about $17,000 more than the average price for all new vehicles. The lack of chargers in some parts of the country can also be a deal breaker. So, for those who need a new set of wheels, should you go electric now or wait? Or maybe split the difference and go hybrid? I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, a contributing editor at checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the Consumer Man, Herb Weisbaum.
In this episode, we'll look at your options for going electric and what's coming down the road in the near future. We'll talk to Consumer Reports about how these vehicles do when it comes to performance and reliability, and find out why CR says you might want to lease that electric. Plus, a look at federal tax credits that can bring down the cost of buying some new and used electric vehicles. We start with my friend Paul Eisenstein, publisher and editor-in-chief of the website thedetroitbureau.com. Paul has been covering the automotive industry for more than 40 years, and he joins us, of course, from Detroit.
Hey, Herb. Great to be with you.
When we spoke to you a little more than a year ago, looking ahead to the marketplace, everybody said there are going to be a lot of new models, the prices are going to come down. Here we are, middle of 2023. Where are we?
Well, we definitely have a lot more models. At least 24 vehicles have come into the EV sector over the last year, and there's more coming this year. Some pretty important ones like the Chevrolet Equinox EV and the Chevrolet Blazer EV.
So when are we going to see the $35,000 to $40,000 price range electric vehicles that everybody talked about?
Well, that's one of the issues. We didn't expect to see that all the raw materials for EV batteries would surge in price as much as they did last year. So 2022 was the first time since the first EVs came to market that we actually saw battery prices go up a bit. The prices for the raw material are coming down a bit now, finally, and that should help. But it's going to be a while before we see a lot of vehicles in the mainstream segment. We're seeing a few. General Motors is claiming that it will start the Equinox at about $30,000. We have the Fisker Ocean, which will be coming in with federal incentives just under $30,000. So we're starting to see some more affordable products. And in fact, we have the Chevrolet Bolt EV, which will go out of production late this year, that with the federal incentives will actually come in just a hair below $20,000.
And let's be honest, automakers make more money, they make more profit when they sell the higher end, the luxury electric vehicles, so they're focused on that first. I mean, it's just business logic.
Oh yeah, it's very definitely business logic. And you have to remember that the number of vehicles in that under $35,000 segment is getting rarer and rarer. If you look at the average price of a new vehicle in the United States, in April, it ran just over $46,000. So if you're talking even a $45,000 EV, you're actually talking about something that's a little bit below the average for the United States.
You get to drive these cool new vehicles for a living. Tell us about a couple of models that have caught your eye that are going to be hitting showrooms before the end of the year you want our listeners to know about.
There's going to be a lot coming this year. From Vietnam, believe it or not, that country's first automaker has just started selling some of their vehicles here in the United States. I had a chance to drive the VinFast VF8. It's a reasonably impressive vehicle. I think they need to work on some of their software a little bit, but on the whole, it's going to catch a lot of eyes. I've driven some of the new BMW products, including the new i4 and the iX. Those are certainly things that luxury buyers who want to go electric should be considering. Cadillac has been very slow to market with the Lyriq, and they're just starting to ramp up production. So I think that with them launching an all-wheel drive version in the coming months, that's going to get a lot of attention. We have products coming from all sorts of manufacturers. Toyota, their Lexus brand is coming to market with the RZ. That's going to be an important product for that brand, and will usher in a lot of new electric vehicles in the Lexus brand over the next few years. Pretty much everywhere you look. I mean, you can go all the way up to Rolls-Royce, which recently launched the Spectre, the first Rolls-Royce battery electric vehicle.
Since we spoke last year, you now are an EV owner, the new Ford F-150 Lightning. You had to wait about 4 months to get it. Was it worth the wait?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, the biggest wait I have is ever trying to get it away from my wife. She loves the vehicle. I really like the Lightning, and it's no surprise that Ford is selling every one that they can build. They expected to be able to sell maybe 25,000 a year. Well, they're now ramping up production capacity to 150,000. We've seen a big growth in EVs. 2022 ended at about 5% or so of the total U.S. new vehicle market. The first 3 months of this year, it ran as high as 8.5%. Now, there may be a slowdown. There's some indications that EV sales will slow down a bit, and that's not surprising because, unfortunately, as part of the new Inflation Reduction Act, there are new rules that really restrict the number of EVs that qualify and the number of buyers. There's now a price cap and an income cap, so wealthy buyers may not get the full or even any incentives as a result of the IRA.
And we're going to be talking more about those tax incentives with Ron Montoya from Edmunds later in this podcast. But that brings up an issue that while these vehicles are exciting to many, they're not for everyone. A new survey from J.D. Power shows that the percentage of people who say they are very unlikely to consider an EV for the next purchase went up in each of the first 3 months of 2023, hitting 21% in March. The main factors dampening enthusiasm were price and lack of charging stations. And Paul, J.D. Power noted that, quote, many vehicle shoppers are becoming more adamant about their decision to not consider an EV for their next purchase. What do you think's going on here?
It doesn't surprise me in the least. That actually suggests that 3/4 of the American public is either looking for an EV or at least considering it. That's a huge number. That's a big increase. It's not the negatives, the ones who don't want it. It's the number that do want it. It's spectacular increase in the numbers over the last few years. That said, I think there are a lot of people who are interested in EVs are still hesitant, and some of those reasons are legitimate. Pricing can still be pretty high depending on the product you want. Some of the incentives have gone away for many people, and there is an issue with the charging infrastructure. No surprise. We didn't have the gas infrastructure, the network that we now have every corner, it seems, in America, building up overnight. But the fact is, the speed with which new EV chargers are going into the ground is remarkable. There are thousands of them being added almost every month. So that means that we are going to see it easier and easier and easier to find a place to charge over the next few years.
We are seeing reports now of people pulling up to charging stations and they don't work, they're out of service. They got to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's definitely the bigger concern. And I've run into that myself where I've gone to a charging station and a couple of the chargers don't work. Luckily, that's being hammered home. We just heard from the head of Electrify America, the new CEO, who drove across country and acknowledged that some of his own chargers are not working. Automakers are getting ticked off. They have a lot of deals directly with charging companies. Many of them offer, as you know, free charging, sometimes just X dollars worth of free energy, sometimes as much as 3 years of free energy. And they don't like it when their EV buyers find out they can't plug in and get charged up. So I expect that problem will be improved. We will see a significant improvement in reliability of EV chargers, even as more chargers go into the ground.
For people who are concerned, maybe they live in an area where there aren't a lot of charging stations at this point in time, is a plug-in hybrid an option they may want to consider?
It's very much so. Most of these models, also known as PHEVs, have fairly large battery packs, enough to do anywhere from about 35 to as much as 70 miles or more in all-electric mode. For the average American, this takes care of their daily needs, whether commuting or running errands. So they can operate as if the vehicle were all electric. But when the power runs down, the battery drains, the vehicle will automatically switch to hybrid mode, where it will use whatever's left in the battery and fire up the gas engine. In other words, it'll be just like, say, a Toyota Prius. One of the other advantages is most, if not all, of the new plug-in hybrids allow you to decide whether or not you want to operate at any particular time in all-electric mode. And one of the advantages of that is you may choose to use that when you're in a city, and there are going to be more and more of these around the world, that have congestion charges. London, for example, where you can pay a fairly stiff premium to drive in there with a gas-powered vehicle, but the congestion charge may be waived if you're operating on battery power.
This would take care of that range anxiety. If you couldn't find a charger, it switches over to gasoline and you're good to go.
Right. Almost all Americans on their daily commutes would be able to run solely in electric power. They don't have to use their gas engine at all. So if your battery is low or for some other reason you don't want to be operating purely in electric, at that moment, you can operate just like a regular hybrid.
Great information. Paul, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Herb.
A big question with any new technology, how reliable is it? Up next, we head out to Consumer Reports Auto Test Track in Connecticut to find out. I'm Herb Weisbaum, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
If you like what you hear, we hope you'll consider being a Consumerpedia supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. Want ratings for local car dealers and auto repair shops? If you live in Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Paul, or the Washington, D.C. area and haven't joined Checkbook yet, we'll give you a free 30-day subscription. Check us out at checkbook.org/Consumerpedia. checkbook.org/Consumerpedia.
Electric vehicle sales are on the rise. About 5% of all new car and trucks sold last year were plug-in electric. As Consumer Reports points out, EVs have a lot going for them. They create fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and their quick, silent acceleration is a lot of fun to drive. But before you shell out a boatload of money, the average sale price for a new EV last year was $61,000. There's a lot to consider. Alex Nizik with Consumer Reports Autos is here to help us with that. Alex is manager of auto testing and insights at CR's Auto Test Track in Connecticut.
Hey, how you doing, Herb?
So one of the most important things is reliability. With so many new models coming out in the last year, is there any way for you to judge that yet?
It is always a little bit of a balancing act with new models. We don't have a lot of history and data to really back up their reliability. We can kind of make predictions about reliability based on EVs and how they perform at large, kind of in the past and in general. But then we can also look at a brand's history and really look at how other models have maybe performed in the past, something similar, and make a prediction. But you're absolutely right. With new models, new technology, especially with EVs, that is a little bit more difficult. But there are actually some models that have been around for long enough where we do have some data. Things like the Tesla Model 3 or the Nissan Leaf, for example. Those have been around a while, and we do see that reliability on those models has increased over time. And a lot of times, actually, with electric vehicles, some of the reliability issues that we do see aren't even necessarily with the powertrain or the motors and the batteries and charging systems and these things. Sometimes it's just regular stuff, paint and trim and things like that. Or, they pack a lot of technology into these cars and infotainment and other features, and sometimes things go wrong there too. So it is tricky, but, the longer time goes on, the more data we'll have and the better predictions and information we'll be able to provide.
Is your advice for EVs the same as it is for regular gas-powered vehicles or hybrids? Don't get a new model the first year, give it some time to work out the bugs and see how it's gone?
Yeah, definitely. That advice hasn't really changed. In fact, it's probably more applicable to EVs because the technology is relatively new, right? So not only are they bugs and things being worked out, but the technology is changing really quickly. So absolutely, my advice is to, wait a couple years if you can. I know EVs, they're new, shiny. It might be really tempting to get the new thing that's coming out. But if you can swing it and you can wait, absolutely. I mean, and that has an impact on things that are unrelated to the fact that it's an EV. Infotainment, body structure, suspension, all these other systems still carry over to EVs, and those still need time to, work themselves out as well.
In theory, an all-electric vehicle should cost less to maintain. Is that right? Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, generally speaking, electric vehicles tend to have fewer moving parts than a gasoline-powered car. Mainly the engine is a pretty complicated machine controlling tiny explosions and managing fuel and all these things, right? So there's a lot of moving parts to do that. So you get rid of all that with EVs. So not only are they simpler in that regard, they're quite complicated in their own respect, but less moving parts, that's great. And then also you generally have less routine maintenance to do. Yes, you still have to change tires, brakes, and these types of things, but you're not doing regular oil changes or oil filter changes. There's no air filter for the engine, no spark plugs or anything like that. They do still have coolant in them for cooling the battery and some other systems, but generally those are 100,000 mile type of maintenance schedules on parts like that or fluids like that. So yeah, overall they're usually less comprehensive to maintain and less expensive as a result.
So whether you charge at home or on the road, you are paying for that electricity, and that's going to vary a lot based on where you live or where you charge up. Talk about that if you would.
Absolutely. Depending on where you are, that's going to change dramatically. And, it also changes potentially based on when you charge. You might be able to take advantage of off-peak charging at night, and generally charging at home is cheaper than if you have to rely on the public charging infrastructure, right? So if you buy an EV but you're not able to charge at home or in a garage or something like that, or even at work, and you have to go rely on these DC fast chargers, they call them, you're going to be paying quite a bit more to do that. So definitely you have to look at where you are and the electricity rates that are around you, but also how many chargers are around you, and it can get a little bit complicated. So you definitely want to look at your situation before deciding to dive in and go this direction.
From what I've read, automakers right now don't need to offer many incentives on their EVs. Is that right?
Yeah, the incentive situation is quite complicated. I mean, most of the incentives that you hear about are coming from the federal government, and those are kind of what have been changing quite a bit lately with the tax credits and all the rules that qualify a vehicle for it. But yeah, at the manufacturer level, they really don't have to. And to be honest, because these vehicles are being built in smaller numbers and they were really at a point where they are luxury items, to be honest. So you get high demand and low supply. So there's really no incentive, if you want to say, for the automakers to give incentives. So you're finding a lot of EVs are going for the sticker price at least, or certainly over.
Consumer Reports advice has always been buy a vehicle, don't lease it. You're going to pay more if you lease a vehicle. But in your April auto issue, you suggested that some people might want to consider leasing their electric vehicle. What's with that?
Yeah, great point. Pretty confusing. And you're right, it is a little bit of a switch on the mentality and the advice that we give. It goes back to the fact that the technology is new and changing, and reliability is part of that. But also, as this stuff really starts to take off and mature 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the range on some of these vehicles and the charging capability and all these things could be at a point where the electric vehicles of today might not be all that desirable. So if you were to purchase it, trying to sell that secondhand could put you in a difficult situation. So since the technology is new, leasing it and being able to give it back, frankly, after 3 years or so could definitely be an advantage.
Final question. All the buzz right now, all the hype is around all electric vehicles, but Consumer Reports is still suggesting that for some people, hybrids, gasoline electric hybrid, makes much more sense. In fact, in your top 10 picks for 2023 that you put out in April, a whole bunch of them were hybrids.
And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, a lot of hybrids, they're really, really good. The technology's been around for quite a while now, so they're getting quite reliable. We actually see that some hybrids are more reliable than their non-hybrid counterparts. Toyota Corolla hybrid, for example, even being more reliable somehow than the regular non-hybrid version. So they have that going for them. They're also cheaper. The example that we used is if you're interested in something like the Nissan Leaf, one of the less expensive EVs out there, depending on where you live and the purchase price of that EV, it might make more sense to just get the Corolla hybrid because of how great fuel economy it gets and the price of fuel relative to the price of the electricity of where you live. So a little bit of math that you have to do there, but where it starts to make less sense maybe to go with a hybrid is if you're really shopping in that luxury vehicle space. So if you compare something like a Tesla Model 3 to a BMW 3 Series, right? They're comparable in purchase price, so you're not really saving anything there. And then, of course, the Model 3 is just more efficient and cheaper to own and operate and charge up compared to fueling the BMW. So it really depends on where you're shopping in the market. And one final point on that, because of the availability of chargers, depending on where you live, if you live in a more rural area, you might not want to deal with charging or trying to search for those public chargers on long trips. So it could be, more convenient for you to just go with a really fuel efficient hybrid. That's just more convenient.
Great information. Alex Nizick is the manager of auto testing and insights at Consumer Reports Auto Test Center in Connecticut. If you want more information about this, just go to consumerreports.org. They have all kinds of information about hybrids, electrics, all kinds of autos. They do all the testing. Alex, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we're going to talk about those tax incentives with an expert from Edmunds. I'm Herb Weisbaum, and you're listening to Consumerpedia on checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. The average new EV models can go about 300 miles before needing to be recharged. The Lucid Air sedan, with a sticker price of $139,000, can go about 500 miles. Battery warranties for all electric vehicles and hybrids is at least 8 years or 100,000 miles, which is longer than most powertrain warranties. According to an analysis by the Union of Concerned Scientists, the average electric car on the road today has the same greenhouse gas emissions as a car getting 88 miles per gallon.
The federal government is trying to encourage EV sales by offering tax credits of up to $7,500. But there are requirements based on the vehicle, the price, and your income. Let's talk about that with Ronald Montoya. He's Senior Consumer Advice Editor at Edmunds. Hi, Ron. Nice to talk to you again.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So the U.S. Treasury Department published its list of qualifying EVs in late April, and our listeners may be surprised to hear how few cars and trucks are on the list.
Before, there weren't as many requirements for EVs, but ever since the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been a number of requirements that had to have been met in order for vehicles to qualify.
Tell us about those restrictions, where the vehicle's made, where the materials and the rechargeable battery is sourced, the price, and the buyer's income.
Yeah, so at the baseline, the vehicle needs to have been assembled in North America. And then once it passes that bar, if you're looking into like an electric pickup truck or SUV, that's going to have a price cap of about $80,000. And then if you want any other type of a vehicle, like a sedan, for example, that would be about $55,000 for the limit. And that's the MSRP. So it's not going to factor in taxes or anything like that. At this point, the vehicle needs to meet a couple of percentages with regards to critical battery minerals and components. A certain percentage of them, and it's going to change over the course of the coming years, it needs to have been made either in the U.S. or any country that has a free trade agreement with the U.S. And, I don't expect people to know these percentages, but this is something that these cars have to pass in order to qualify.
And Canada and Mexico have free trade agreements with the U.S.
That's right, and Europe as well. In terms of income and the buyers, they're going by the modified adjusted gross income. And so that depends on how you file your taxes. So if you have joint tax returns or a surviving spouse, it cannot be more than $300,000 a year. If you're the head of household, it's $225,000. And then individual or any other status, it's got to be $150,000. That's the limit.
So the list isn't that long. So run down the ones that are on the list right now.
Okay, so there's the Cadillac Lyriq. There's the Chevy Bolt and the Bolt EUV, which is the SUV version. These are notable because they're not going to be available next year. This will be the last model year for them. General Motors has chosen to discontinue them because they have other models coming out under a different battery architecture. But those two are qualifying now. Then you have the Chevy Silverado electric vehicle for the truck. With Ford, you have the E-Transit cargo van. You have the F-150 Lightning and the Mustang Mach-E. With the Genesis brand, you have the electrified GV70. And then with Nissan, you have the Nissan Leaf. And later on, when this vehicle is released, we expect the Nissan Ariya to be there, but it's not there yet. With Rivian, you have both the SUV, so the R1S and the R1T for the truck. But those have to meet the price limit because they can get pricey on those. And then with Tesla, you have the Model 3 and the Model Y, but not the higher ones like the Model S or X. Those wouldn't qualify because of the price limit. And then finally, with Volkswagen, you have the ID4.
So clearly, not a lot of foreign manufacturers on the list, which I guess is one of the intents of the law to get more EVs made in America.
Yeah, that was the idea behind it, is to increase the amount of electric vehicles that are made in the U.S. to provide more jobs and make that supply chain closer to home.
Is that why we're going to be seeing foreign manufacturers building plants in the U.S. and battery manufacturing plants in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico?
Yeah, you're definitely going to see that in the coming years, although it takes time for that.
There was a lot of publicity about Tesla dropping the price of its lower-end vehicles. Was that to meet the price points for the credits?
That was certainly part of the reason, but another reason is that there's more competition in the market, and so they just wanted to be in a stronger position in order to compete.
You know, one way to bring down the cost is to lease the new EV, but Checkbook and other consumer advocates have always said leasing costs more in the long run, but both Consumer Reports and you at Edmunds suggest leasing an electric vehicle could be a money saver. Explain how that works.
From a monthly payment perspective, you are going to have a lower monthly payment with the lease. And then typically with electric cars, the technology changes so quickly that you're going to be able to see the technology change in the coming years, and you may want something with more range or more tech on it. So that's one of the reasons why we recommend leasing it. And in the past, the resale value of electric vehicles has depreciated at a faster rate than vehicles. It's starting to get better, but that was one of the reasons why we also had recommended leasing. Now, if you're talking about just from a numbers perspective, then over the course of many, many years, way past the loan is paid off, purchasing the vehicle will be the best financial decision. But if you're more thinking in the short term or just thinking about your monthly budget, leasing is a good option for you. And another thing about leasing is that there is a bit of a loophole that allows vehicles that are not currently on this list to get the tax credit because they're qualified as like a commercial vehicle. And at that point, the leasing company gets the credit, and it's up to them whether they want to apply that to the consumer. But I've heard of some cases where it is being applied, and you can potentially have that factored into your payment in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily get if you were going to purchase that vehicle.
Let's be honest, a new EV is more than many car buyers can afford, but now some used EVs qualify for credit up to $4,000. How does that work, and what kind of restrictions are there in place for that?
So the restrictions for that one is that it needs to cost no more than $25,000, regardless of the type of vehicle, and it needs to be purchased at a dealership. And at this point, EVs haven't been around that long, so it may be a little tough to find something at that price point. But if you can, you should definitely take advantage of that tax credit.
So people may not realize an electric vehicle's range is going to fluctuate over time based on the age of the battery and how much it's been used. You folks at Edmunds now offer a battery range score. How does that work?
So we've partnered with a company called Recurrent, and they're a bunch of battery chemistry scientists that have developed an algorithm to determine what the life of a battery still has and what kind of range you could expect from it. And so if you're looking at vehicles on our website that are being sold, it's going to come with that report. And this can help you identify, because that's probably one of the biggest challenges of shopping for a used electric vehicle is you don't know how that prior person has taken care of the battery. But they have done analysis of multiple owners who are participating in their program, and they've come up with pretty accurate algorithms as far as determining what percentage of vehicle or a battery you have left.
You deal with giving people advice all the time. What's your advice for someone in the market or thinking about getting an electric vehicle?
Don't let the complexity of these tax credits get in the way of you buying the car. There are resources like at Edmunds where we list the vehicles, we list the requirements in one place so that it's easy to find. And, electric vehicles are a great option. A lot of people who drive them, they love it and they don't want to go back to gas cars. So, it is a more complicated system now, but it's still possible to do that and get a better deal.
And is it pretty clear that down the road, more and more vehicles are going to qualify?
Yeah, for sure. More vehicles are going to qualify down the road. And one good thing that's happening as of 2024 is that tax credit will be allowed to be used as an immediate discount on the vehicle, whereas right now, you would have to file that on your taxes for 2023. But starting in 24, you could apply that as a flat discount on the car. So that's going to make things a lot easier.
Well, great information. Ronald Montoya is Senior Consumer Advice Editor at Edmunds. You can find a lot more on their website. Just go to Edmunds, EDMUNDS.com. Ron, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this edition of Consumerpedia. We hope you'll rate this episode and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support this show is to follow us on Consumerpedia on Facebook and Instagram, and at MyConsumerpedia on Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum. Thanks for listening.
Consumerpedia is a public service of checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that helps you save money and make smarter choices. You can count on Checkbook to help you find the best services and avoid the worst, with local ratings that are accurate and unbiased. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/consumerpedia. If you like what you've heard, we hope you'll become a supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.